Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Bright Blue event on the incredibly topical subject of recycling. So, closing the loop, the future of UK recycling solutions. And this is always a great topic because it affects everybody, it affects individuals, it affects businesses, and it affects organisations, politics, geopolitics, etc. So I'm sure we're going to have a very wide-ranging and interesting discussion this morning. So as many of you know, Bright Blue is an independent pressure group and think tank for liberal conservatism. And this morning, we're very pleased to be partnering with British Glass on this event. And I'm sure they're going to have a lot to tell us on the topic at hand. Please feel free to tweet about the event. So our handle is at Bright Blue, and British Glass I think it's at British Glass. Okay, so I'm Diane Banks. I'm a non-executive director of Bright Blue, and I'm very pleased to be joined this morning by Jo Churchill. To my immediate left, she is the Minister at the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and she was previously Minister for Vaccines and Public Health. Please save your vaccines and public health questions for another time. We have, who are we coming to next? We've got Paul to my immediate right. So Paul's Chief Executive of the Industry Council for Packaging and the Environment. Is it known as InkPen?
It is known as InkPen.
InkPen, excellent, that's very catchy. And then to my far right, we have Professor Michael Shaver. So Michael is the Professor of Polymer Science at University of Manchester. So he had a 20-minute walk this morning. He is also the editor of the European Polymer Journal. So this has been his subject of research for many years, and of course it's now incredibly topical. So we have Councillor Jo Potter. Jo is the Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Biodiversity and Staffordshire Moorlands District Council. And then finally, at the far left, we have Phillip Fenton, who is from British Glass, our sponsor this morning. Phillip is the lead packaging and recycling advisor at British Glass. Right, so the format this morning is I'm going to ask each of the panellists to speak for 5 minutes. And then we're gonna take some questions both from the floor and from online, because we are, of course, we're live streaming this morning. So the questions that we're going to be asking the panel to address are pretty wide-ranging. So what are the attitudes of households and businesses towards current waste management practices in the UK? How can digital technologies such as cloud computing and AI improve recycling systems? Is a UK deposit return scheme, known as DRS, needed? And if so, what should this look like? How can extended producer responsibility, EPR, which for those of you who don't know, it's a policy tool which requires producers to be responsible for the packaging at the end of the life of the packaging, not just at the point that it's sold by them. What impact will new waste management policies such as DRS have on local authorities and their approach to curbside collection? And what further policies are needed from government to improve waste management and recycling rates in the UK? Okay, so 5 minutes from everybody, starting with Jo.
Thank you, Diane. And first of all, I'd like to say what a pleasure it is to be here at Bright Blue this morning. As was said, I've had this portfolio a full 2 weeks. So I'm going to confine my comments to a brief outline, because actually what I'm more interested in is the discussion. Many of you I have met through a previous portfolio. I looked after public health, but also primary care and prevention. And I prefer to listen and think and talk. If there were really simple solutions to problems, we would find them. And arguably, we wouldn't probably need government directing us in quite the way it has to. Solutions aren't simple, but I think we're at a very exciting time in the whole of the waste and resources agenda. And actually, we have a chance to lead and inspire and innovate. So I'm particularly interested in what our universities and our research centres may be looking to do. Now, I've got this responsibility, which as I've said, I've had for a full 2 weeks. However, it's clear in those first 2 weeks that these are exciting times at DEFRA. The Environment Bill stands on the cusp of agreement. It's in the Lords at the moment. It'll be coming back to us in the Commons. It lays the foundation for our green recovery, restoring biodiversity and cutting carbon emissions, of which waste plays such an important part if we're going to achieve it. In this year of COP26, it's a powerful statement of the government's ambition to leave our environment in a better state for our children, and in my case, in a few weeks' time, our grandchildren, than we found it. It also sets out a comprehensive package of measures to reduce waste and increase recycling. Now, these are and should be a powerful aid to the waste industry in its effort to cut its environmental impact. Foremost amongst these will be the DRS, or the Deposit Return Scheme, which will incentivise all of us to recycle more of the drinks containers that we buy, and in so doing, increase the quantity and quality of material recycled. It could also strike a blow against the menacing of littering that we see around our streets, and we also see right across our countryside, along our highways, and so on. It is often a councillor's and an MP's, certainly a very large amount of our post bag. Now, I know it's an issue where friends from British Glass have expressed strong views in the consultation, and as those of you who know me in the room, strong views are good. Strong views mean we can have a good, honest conversation. The Environment Bill will introduce a consistent collection, with every local council collecting food waste and plastics, making it easier for people to recycle and making it easier and more efficient for government and councils to work together to explain those benefits that recycling offers everybody. And making things simple is usually the key. This measure alone is expected to save more than 1 million tonne of carbon from being released every year. The bill also introduces the extended producer responsibility, moving the cost of dealing with key areas of waste from the taxpayer to people who make or import it, powerfully incentivising to cut both waste produced but making it easier to recycle. Finally, moving to electronic waste licensing, changes to our brokers, dealers and carriers regime will make it harder for those rogue waste operators, whilst making it easier for legitimate companies to understand what happened to the waste they produce. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who's taken the time to take part in consultations on the important innovations, the response to which will be published in the coming months. As I say, they are exciting times. They are times to innovate. They are times to look forward to how we can do it better. For the waste industry, for the environment, for all of us. So I look forward to listening to you. I look forward to working with you in the future, because I believe we can deliver those historic changes that will make the environment better for all of us.
Thank you, Jo. That's a really great starting point for discussion. I'm just now going to move to Paul. Could you just briefly, Paul, say what InkPen does?
Thank you very much, Diane, and morning to the whole panel, and Minister, congratulations on your new role. I can promise you, after 20 years of being involved in this, when I thought it might be a few months at the beginning, you will love this industry. There is so much to be positive about. The Industry Council is made up of manufacturers, retailers, brands, recyclers, reprocessors across all of the materials mix. So not just glass, but across everything. You may not have heard of InkPen, but you will have heard of all of my members in terms of the global brands, the retailers and so on. Together, they're responsible for something like about 1 million jobs in the UK, about £10 billion into the UK economy alone. And I think I want to open this up, if I may, Diane, with a few general points, because I know the discussion will get into it, and so will the panel. This was about closing the loop, and I feel that to close the loop on recycling, we need to open more doors on opportunities, on ambitions and achievements. And I have to say, the government has done a very good job so far of opening many of those doors. On circularity, circular economy, which is much talked about, to keep the materials going around in a loop instead of being put in a hole in the ground, we need to up our ambitions. I personally feel that it's within our potential and grasp as a country, not just for the UK to be a European leader on recycling. We have the potential to be a global leader, in the UK, a global leader on recycling. And I'm going to go into some aspects now which touch on the consultations that the ministers mentioned. Consistency, and you might notice that the letter C comes through this. So I've already talked about circularity and circular economy. The next C is consistency. Consistency of what's collected, and Joe will probably comment on this as a council person. And by the way, I spent 25 years in council, so I know some of your pain and have brought that with me, so I haven't got it. The consistency of what's collected. You know what? There's a lot of consistency already out there because of what councils and the industry have done over the last 25 years. We wouldn't have recycling rates as they are now without that consistency in place, without packaging being able to be recycled. Where we need a major push, and this is in the government's consultation, is on plastic films and flexibles, aluminium trays, foils, and aerosols, and also on cartons. And our message there is, government, please keep up your ambitions on those and the timescales on those. It's the flip side of EPR, where the money goes into the system, but the value is the recycling rates on the materials that come out. Consistency, there's a lot of it. What there needs to be also a major push on, though, is capture of those recyclates. I can say to all of you here and those online that the recyclability of many materials has been pretty much done, apart from those plastic films and flexibles where there's a lot still to do. So many items are eminently 100% recyclable, but we're getting capture back into those systems of 50%, 40%, 30%. And we need a major push on items, not the traditional items that we recycle, but what about everything in the bathroom, everything else in the kitchen? And when we think about plastic bottles, sorry to use the word plastic in a glass event, but when we think about the word plastic bottles, don't forget only half of all of those plastic bottles are beverage and would fall into a deposit return system. The other half are all the items that we have in our bathrooms and kitchens, usually with lots of liquids in them. So capture is a major part. Confidence, public confidence. How confident are citizens that recyclates collected from homes, our homes, or on street are actually recycled? We have done a major survey, Industry Council, in September. I can't give you all the results now because I've promised it to another conference, can you believe it? How could I have done that? But there is a link.
Go on.
There is a link. I've had my first challenge from the minister.
You can't say and not say.
I've had my first key finding, which is this. There is a definite link between citizens' lack of confidence that items are being recycled, their recycling behaviours, and therefore the recycling rates that Joe Porter and other councils are really interested in, so are we. I can give you more insights when we come into the questioning. We'll see how open I can be about that. By the way, Staffordshire, Herefordshire, Hertfordshire, Kent, Somerset and Surrey are working with InkPen now in the early days on a project to do with public confidence in recycling and how we really push that confidence up. Final point, Diane, is around coherence. Coherence of the whole set of packaging reforms that we have. And I think the Minister is right. We can't cherry pick some of those reforms. We have to develop a single system for all of the packaging so that businesses, every business, every council, every citizen is absolutely clear about what their responsibilities are going forward. But there are three parts of the coherence that I think we'd welcome a conversation another time, Minister. Firstly, I want to give due credit to Michael Gove, Therese Coffey, George Eustace and Rebecca Powell. They've made terrific strides over the last 3 years and I think given you, Minister, a real springboard to jump from now. The brilliance, the luminescence of all of these reforms, we have to make sure that that doesn't dissipate or diminish in the next 6 months by being trudged down with discussions and consultations which take us backwards. To keep the light shining brightly, I have 3 points, and this may come up in discussions. Firstly, the coherence of the timing of EPR, DRS, and consistency. It needs to be completely joined up. We cannot cherry pick when we do one and let another. I have to say, what matters in England really matters for the whole country, given it's 85% of the population and a vast majority of the 4.6 million businesses that we have in the UK. Secondly, coherent policies. We're getting there. The ambitions are there, but I think we're not quite firing on all cylinders yet. 60% of the way there, 40% more to go in making sure that the policies themselves are absolutely well designed. And lastly, and this isn't necessarily for government, not everything is for government, coherent supply chain actions. I'm on one side of the supply chain, Joe, you're on another side, but we often speak as if we're in silos. We have to have a seamless supply chain on recycling in order to make sure that, for example, what we collect for recycling goes back as recycled content. Finally, celebrate, another C. When we get it right, as the UK absolutely will get it right, we will be a UK global recycling leader. That is worth celebrating. And Minister, I'd love for you to be on conference, standing on stage and celebrating that during your tenure for at least the next 4 years, please. We need you.
Great hustle there. I think you made a really good point around confidence and messaging, because I think a lot of people, you're told to recycle, whether you're a business or individual, and actually you don't know what happens to it. You just do it because you're told to do it. And I think that is a theme that needs to be brought out a lot more. Anyway, right, let's go to Michael.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think it's wonderful to follow after Paul, because I guess the theme of what I want to talk about is nuance. And so I think whenever you're looking at any recycling system, whether that be plastic or glass or aluminium, it is really about the specificity of how those things are being used. And this is an exceptionally challenging reality for anyone developing policy, because policy, it's really difficult to put the nuance into that legislation. And so I'm just going to challenge, and I think all of this focus on the circularity of the systems, my background is predominantly in plastics, is essential, but it's really important that this legislation is done right. So I'll first pick up on something actually as a legislative tool that hasn't been brought up, and that's the plastic packaging tax. So glass event, I know, apologies to the end of the table, but the plastic packaging tax is mandating 30% recycled content in plastic packages. Okay, what does that mean? Well, 30% recycled content in a polyethylene terephthalate bottle, PET, that's really easy to do. 30% recycled content in a food package made of polypropylene or PP, impossible, because we actually don't have any recycled polypropylene here. And so the artifice of putting the same ambition on each of our different pieces of plastic is where that legislation falls. And of course, it also precludes the many organizations that are part of the British Plastics Federation that have much greater ambitions than that are targeting rates that are much greater than 30%. And so the nuance there means that yes, the plastic packaging tax is good, but it could have done much more. The second thing I'll turn to is the deposit return scheme. It is fantastic if we can recover bottles and ensure that those bottles go bottle to bottle recycling. But what does that do to both our local councils that were depending on those funds to come into them to fund their recycling setups? Does that mean that they no longer have profitable routes to collect and recycle trays? Is this now a loss leader because you've taken the most profitable part of that route to recycling away from the councils? And why is it that we are only focused on bottles when in fact the challenges would be to have deposit return schemes on a much greater array of product shapes and types? And so there's a challenge there in terms of the ambition of what we're doing with DRS, but how it interacts with, as you said, the system. Because the public, it's great to go and do a survey with people who are passionate about the environment and want to make sustainable changes. But the reality is as a society, we have lots of people who do not have time, right? Who are working multiple jobs, who have different perspectives or priorities. And we have to ensure that that system works for everyone, which means that the system actually has to sit in behind everything. And we have to have a route of circularity, which involves home collection integrated with high street collection, integrated with all the waste produced at this conference. All of that has to work in a system really well. And so that needs to take the decision-making, the nuance away from the consumer and put the nuance on our waste management companies. So advanced sorting technologies that are emerging but are untested. And that means that something like extended producer responsibility, which really is great, and I've fed into the consultation myself, that has to put those gathered taxes back in to support our infrastructure. Because right now what we're doing, especially with plastic, is we're actually exporting our plastic waste and importing recycled plastic. That's a real challenge. Why are we not remanufacturing as a nation when we have that opportunity? Well, we have the opportunity to invest, to create the infrastructure here, to make us world leaders, to make us globally dominant, and then we're not just exporting our waste products, we're actually exporting our insight, exporting our leadership and our innovation into circularity of all materials that we have. And so that focus on remanufacturing, focus on retaining those resources and treating them like resources and not waste is really essential.
There's a key theme emerging here, I think, about the need to have a single clear system and have the messaging around that to all stakeholders. Okay, Joe Porter.
Thank you very much, and good morning everyone. Thanks for inviting me to speak on the panel today. So, recycling is obviously something that's really important across the country at the moment. Obviously with COP26 and climate change being top of the agenda, recycling is one of those things that's very tangible. It's something that we can all do, we can all play our part in. If you look at the UK's recycling at the moment, so if you look at the amount of carbon emissions it cuts, it's about 18 million tonnes of CO2 it actually cuts every year. So that's the equivalent of taking 12 million cars off the road. So it's something that we all need to play our part in. And obviously over the past 20 months we've obviously had a global pandemic. We've had people spending more time at home. You know, obviously a lot of people having very flexible lifestyles. That's brought about a lot of lifestyle changes that we've not necessarily seen before. That's brought both challenges and opportunities for all of us, you know, in recycling. So obviously we've had a lot of people paying more attention to food waste and recycling, people taking up home composting, which is something I really welcome. I'm really passionate about home composting myself. And obviously we've had more people, you know, paying attention to which bins to put their waste in, you know, to obviously make sure we recycle more. And obviously we as councils, we've been on the front line during the pandemic, obviously providing all these essential services to keep people going through the pandemic. One of those has obviously been waste collection. A lot of councils across the country have obviously struggled to keep waste collection services going every week. I'm very proud to say that Staffordshire Moorlands District Council, there's not been a single week throughout the pandemic when we've not completed all our roadside collections. We've kept it up all of it. We've not had any delays or we've not had to postpone any services. So I'm very proud of our council team, because a lot of our council teams have had to obviously chip in and keep things going. So I think that's really good. At Staffordshire Moorlands District Council, this is something that we've made a lot of really good progress on in recent years. So back in 2008 and 2009, for those 2 years, we were the best council in the country for recycling. We're not the best anymore. We've gone down slightly, but that's only because everyone else has caught up with us. So we've actually got a recycling rate at the moment of 57.7%. So we're the best in Staffordshire and we're in the top 30 in the country. Our teams have worked really hard to obviously increase that. Obviously, with all the waste strategy and all the stuff that government's doing at the moment, we want to work with government on that and make sure we can get that recycling rate up to 60% plus ideally. You know, the higher the better, obviously, because obviously it's a very positive thing. And obviously going forward, we've got to keep all this going really. We've just got to keep people paying attention to, you know, to recycling and waste and all of that, because I think we've kind of got to capture those lessons learned during the pandemic, take that positive legacy forward if we can, because it's something that, you know, really matters to people out there, and it's something that I think people can tangibly do in their communities to make a difference to the environment, which is an issue that unites communities. That's one thing about the environment. I love the fact that it brings communities together, it unites communities, and I think that's something really positive we need to take forward, really.
I think that's a really great point around lifestyle changes in the pandemic, because I mean, you know, it's so much easier to recycle when you're at home because you just put your things in the right bins and the right bags. When you're out and about on the go getting your takeout coffees and what have you, I guess that's where the system doesn't hold up so well. Okay, so now we're going to go to Philip. Philip, if you could just say a little bit about what British Glass does before you start.
Yeah, of course, and thank you to Bright Blue for hosting, and a special thank you to the Minister for joining us just 2 weeks in, and very impressed that you're already aware of our views as a sector, so that's great to hear. So British Glass is the representative body for the UK glass industry. That includes 6 container manufacturers based in England, across the UK, mainly based in the northwest and northeast of England. Between them, they represent around 80% of the glass packaging you see in your supermarkets on a daily basis. And across the supply chain, they contribute around 120,000 jobs and 1.3 billion pounds a year to the UK economy. In terms of glass itself, you know, glass is one of the most sustainable materials on earth. It's 100% recyclable and it's endlessly recyclable. And it's also the most inert and most non-toxic packaging material, hence why it's used in applications such as alcohol, long life products, and in medical applications such as the COVID vaccine vials. In terms of key priority for the glass sector moving forward, it's all about achieving net zero by 2050. And a key part of this roadmap is increasing the recycled content of our packaging. And that's because for every 1 kilogram of recycled glass that goes back into the packaging, we save 580 kilograms of carbon emissions. And each year that means we're saving around 600,000 tonnes of carbon emissions through recycling glass. And because of this, as a sector, we have a commitment to achieve at least a 90% collected for recycling rate by 2030. This is a European-wide target, and it's something we've embraced in the UK. So how do we do this? When it comes to the deposit return scheme, the glass industry do not believe it's the right solution for glass. We're not opposed to its introduction, but it's not the right solution for glass. We believe it will lead to a number of unintended consequences, and actually will be detrimental to glass recycling rates. So just to touch on a few of these. Under the DRS proposals at the moment, there will be no remelt or no bottle-to-bottle closed-loop recycling rate. Under our current producer responsibility system, the PRN system, we do have that driver, we have that economic and regulatory incentive to ensure that glass goes back into bottles and jars, and that's unique for glass. Also under a DRS, glass is likely to be crushed, broken or compacted. And if it's broken or compacted or crushed, we reduce the quality of material that we can then colour sort. And if we can't colour sort that material, we cannot then use that material back into bottles and jars. And because of this, because it will lead to a reduction in the amount of glass available for closed-loop recycling, we believe will actually increase the carbon footprint of the glass sector because less glass will be going back to remelt. And in addition to this, we've recently seen research from Ireland and also Portugal, which is showing that if you include glass in a deposit return scheme, because of the increased complex logistics of recycling glass through a deposit return scheme compared to your existing curbside or bring site infrastructure, will actually increase the carbon footprint of the glass sector. And another unintended consequence is material switching. International evidence shows that consumers, brands and retailers have switched towards plastic usage when glass is included in a deposit return scheme. And this is due to the higher producer fees for glass generally in deposit return schemes, and also flat deposits. And just one example, in Finland, when plastic was introduced into the DRS there in 2008, the quantity of plastic containers increased from 50 million units a year in 2007 to 375 million units in 2017. You know, my members the glass container manufacturers of the UK want to recycle every piece of glass. It's critical for our net zero ambitions. And quite simply, it also makes economic and commercial sense to make sure we're recycling glass rather than using raw materials. We are already recycling 76% of glass packaging in the UK. That's the highest of any beverage packaging. But we want to go much further, and it's already been touched on. EPR is a key way of doing that. But it will see investment in collection, recycling, on-the-go infrastructure, and importantly, communication and education campaigns, which again we've heard is so important, around confidence and recognising what happens to that material once it's put in your curbside bin. And importantly, EPR, well, crucially for glass.
Going to return to. All right, then we've got some time now for questions. So just to reiterate, questions in the room, please can you wait for the mic, otherwise the people online won't be able to hear you. Questions online, you should have a link that you can type in your question. It will then be texted to me, and I'll get through as many of them as we are able to today. So do we have the gentleman at the front here first?
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah, if you could just also say who you are and where you're from.
My name's Tom Giddings. I'm from Alipro. We are the equivalent to British Glass for the aluminium packaging industry. First of all, fascinating to hear what the panel had to say today, so thank you very much for that. Just a few points and questions. Firstly, I would point out that aluminium can beverage recycling rate last year was 82%. I don't want to get into competition here. But secondly, I would agree with our colleagues in British Glass that closed-loop recycling is very, very important. When we think about DRS, we need to make sure that any material we collect goes back into packaging. Particularly for aluminium, this is very important. It is the most valuable material in any scheme. At the moment, prices are about £3,000 a tonne. It's all-time high. That could be whisked away to other applications for aluminium, cars, aeroplanes, and so on, at a click of a button. We need to make sure that we promote packaging to packaging loops. Aluminium can be done in 60 days in Europe. Cans can back on the shelf. And lastly, again, to echo our points and our friends from British Glass, we agree on a lot. We would echo that unintended consequences do need to be avoided, particularly avoid material switching, so anybody can compete on a fair basis. If we have a flat deposit system of 20 pence, for example, that could encourage switches to larger plastic containers from multi-packs of glass and aluminium cans. For carrying 20 pence, you have a inflated cumulative deposit on every multi-pack, which is the way most drinks are sold in the UK. So we are fully supportive of an all-in DRS, which does include glass. We do differ on that basis. All competing materials should be included. But we need to make sure any system we do put in has the right environmental outcomes without economic disaster.
Do you have a specific question, or just
I would ask
invite
on that last point on unintended consequences. I just want to make sure that what the government and what the other panelists feel could be done to avoid those types of unintended consequences.
Yep. Okay. Paul?
Thank you. I would, Tom, thank you very much for the question. Unintended consequences. The flip side of that is how do we make absolutely sure that the package of reforms, that single package of reforms, is coherent and well designed. And I mentioned earlier that I think we're 60% of the way there, but actually we ourselves, industry, can talk ourselves out of well-designed systems, oftentimes because of the differences between different parts of the same value chain, whether it's manufacturers, retailers, brands, or councils. So I would say this, in the consultations, we were all intensely working on all of those for months on end. It's going to get more intense because we're now down to the hard yards where the governments need to be a bit of a referee sometimes to make sure that all of us compromise to set up a well-designed system. If every part of the supply chain, councils, retailers, brands, stick to their red lines, we won't get very far. So my message is actually not one for government, it's one for the whole value chain. We may have to move to make sure that we get to the well-designed system, but governments, make sure you're in the room to do that, because we need a strong referee to say, if you can't agree, we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah. Joe, government's a referee.
I agree, and that, you know, if you like, what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to achieve boosting recycling rates. We're trying to achieve a circular economy, right? What I've actually heard, you know, oh, I've got 82%, oh, I've got 76%. But if I've got a bottle with an aluminium cap and a glass bottom, I want somewhere to dump it. I don't have my glass collected on the curbside. That's what the C in consistency means. I have 2 councils, both do different coloured bins. That's what consistency means. I have never seen you all promote products with lots and lots of interesting stuff, largely legislated, that you should put on these packets. But actually, where's the simple infographic that says which thing goes where? We are a beautiful country, a diverse country with many languages spoken. Why don't we just do some pictures that stick on the side of your bin? I mean, how hard do you want to make it? This isn't a competition. This is a race. There is something very different in that. Because actually, a little like I think it was the Brownlow brothers showed, in a race, sometimes you look behind you and put your arm around the man who's struggling, or the woman, and you take them across the line to make sure they get their medal too. Now, I agree with Paul. We will put in the management organisation. That's what we've said. We have said that we will provide that guidance. But if everybody's just going to get grumpy that their particular area hasn't had the profile, we are not going to get there. How we get there is by asking, asking Michael to help us on that way. He was right about the 30%, but you know, we need to make sure we're recycling across the board to get that plastic tax back in, because actually you're also about profit. This is smart business, really smart business that can help your bottom line, it can help your USP, it can help your customers be confident in what they're buying. So actually, there are advantages here, but we've got to have a grown-up conversation, because if we're all stood there having our own red line, we're going to find there isn't much in the middle that we can get to.
Thank you. Paul had a comment on that, and I also like to hear from Joe from a council perspective. However, I've just received a message. This is for viewers online. Apparently, there's a problem with the venue's internet connection, so you might not be. The stream might keep cutting out. If that is the case, just to let you know that this will all be available on YouTube afterwards, so you will be able to rewatch it. So apologies for that. Paul, did you just want to quickly?
Well, the Minister gave me a challenge earlier to give you some insights from that public survey. And I'll give you this one. The public, and this was a massive GB-wide survey, it's absolutely current. We did it 3 years ago, we've done it again this month now. When we asked the public across Great Britain, what is the single thing you want to see done with packaging? We gave them a whole list of things. The top one, and by the way, if this was a general election, it'd be a landslide. The public said, make all food and drink packaging recyclable, and all councils collect it, so that wherever you live, you have the same range of materials to collect. And that is our way of saying EPR plus consistency equals what the public want.
Okay, thank you. And Joe, love to hear from the council perspective.
Thank you, yeah. And just to follow on really from what Joe was saying, I think we need consistency across the board, because you know, a lot of residents do get confused. It's understandable why people do get confused, because you go across council boundaries, you know, there's all sorts of different bins. Some councils have more bins than others. Some councils, like mine, you know, collect every single week consistently. You know, food waste, we're pleased to know, Joe, we've always collected weekly. We've prided ourselves on prioritising the finances for doing that, because we know how important it is. But we know other councils have struggled to do that during the pandemic for obvious reasons, because, you know, we've had a lot of staff having to go off with COVID and everything. So, you know, we need that consistency across the board. So I think with, for example, food waste, you know, we need that mandatory food waste recycling series, because that will lead to obviously that increased recycling rate across the board. I think that's one thing we definitely need. We also need a consistent list of accepted materials across the country as well, because then that will reduce contamination. So there's always a massive issue with contamination when it comes to waste, and obviously when you've got contamination, that increases the costs for the council, it reduces the recycling rate. So, you know, it removes that confusion for residents then if we can have that consistent list. And obviously there's also an opportunity for councils to increase their trade waste and their recycling customer base as well. I think that's also really important. So obviously the proposals that have been laid out in the waste strategy will obviously affect that, but it creates a really good opportunity to try and increase that for councils.
Need for consistency is really coming through here. Michael, did you want to?
Well, I think consistency of collection is fine, but I'm going to come back to something that Joe said. It's really important that we ensure these materials are recycled. It doesn't actually matter if something is recyclable if that collection doesn't work to actually transform that back into the same material. And so we need transparency, I would say, in terms of ensuring that the things that are collected are processed in the way that we're promising. And this ties into the public confidence. But it also is a transparency in terms of all of these different materials, right? And I take your point about aligning and working with these different packaging options. Not everything should be packaged in glass. Not everything should be packaged in aluminium. Not everything should be packaged in plastic. That needs to be underpinned by a really strong carbon footprint analysis, but also an understanding that recycling exists as one of many disposal options. We have to increase reuse, and reuse with glass and aluminium works well, and there's emerging opportunities to do that with plastic. And that complexity of our waste management system has to sit behind the assurance that we're giving the public through the councils that we're treating their materials with care.
Yeah, Philip.
Yeah, and just coming back to the point around consistency, you know, there's a reason why all traffic lights are the same across the country. Red means stop, green means go. And it's the same for recycling. We need that common approach across the whole country, and that on its own would make a massive difference, I think, as has been reflected by other panellists. And I just want to highlight one example of where this is happening, and it's happening in the UK, in Wales, where they are the third best in the world for their general recycling rate. And for glass specifically, they're already achieving just under 90% of glass packaging through local authority collections at the doorstep. And Wales is doing that because they have that consistent approach across most of the local authorities there. And there's other things as well, including investment and communication and education and awareness. But those things like awareness and communication campaigns can only come once you do have that consistent approach. You can't have communication campaigns on a national scale without that consistency.
Thank you, Philip. So there was a question here.
Morning, Richard Bullock, member from Belfast. I'm an accountant who does a lot of work with manufacturing and technology companies. My question's just specifically for Michael, quickly, just to make sure I picked you up correctly earlier on. You'd mentioned about polyprop being impossible to recycle.
No, it's not that it's impossible to recycle. It's eminently recyclable. But right now what it is downcycled into other products. So you see packaging that would be used in a food application that ends up in a non-food application. So you've bottled into park bench. There's a few really interesting pilots that are going on right now in the United Kingdom that are looking to cost effectively get to food grade polypropylene, but the supply is not there for someone who wants to then put food grade recycled content into a PP packet.
I think my only statement would be in terms of importing, a lot of our recycled material for this plastic packaging tax. I think one of the things that we should do is shout about the success of British businesses, and there's been quite a few that I know of, like a lot in the Midlands, especially in Wales as well, who have done a lot of work in terms of designing wash plants that they're able to actually process contaminated pots, tubs and trays, even contaminated film that has been driven by this plastic packaging tax, and which has increased the demand. So I think the one thing for me is there's some amazing work that's been done by UK recycling companies in terms of getting towards plastic being closed loop. But yes, I thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, I think it's an issue of scale and accessibility, specifically for the legislative requirements for food grade application.
That's really interesting to hear you say and emphasise how well and how innovative British businesses are being in this area, which obviously comes down to what Joe was saying at the start about us becoming leaders in the field. Far back.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Kate. I'm from the Aldersgate Group. We're a cross-economy business organisation. I just wanted to ask, recycling is clearly crucial, but I think there's a risk that it's seen as enough to close the loop. So I just wanted to ask the panel how we design our policies to accommodate the earlier stages of the waste hierarchy. For example, EPR could be designed just to reduce litter and encourage recycling, but we could be more ambitious so that it actually incentivises reuse and prevention.
Yeah. Okay. Paul, do you want to start on that one?
Thank you very much. I think I picked up most of that question, and it was Kay, wasn't it? Yes. So I got that part right that I could hear. And it was about the waste hierarchy and making sure that we don't just focus on recycling, but look at the other parts that Michael just said as well. Couldn't agree more on that. There is a waste hierarchy. It's been there for 20 years, but recycling is a major part of it. And recycling is the one that has a lot of the targets. And if a system has a lot of the targets, we can't be surprised if all the players in that system therefore respond to meeting all of those targets. But that's not targets at the exclusion of thinking of reuse or even whether we need the things in the first place, dare I say it. And I think there's a personal responsibility here around what does the citizen do, the business do, the council do to communicate consumption, frankly. We in the UK, we use 3 planets worth of resources, whereas we should be using 1 planet's worth of resource. If we're using 3 planets, we're taking some other countries' resources away and using it here. We've got to put that back into balance. I would say this, though, that when we link this back to the widest agenda around climate change and biodiversity crisis, I sometimes hear people say that, well, we need to live like people did in the 18th century in order to get back to those sorts of emissions. I will say this, I'm a firm believer, and I think it can be done, that we can have a 21st century way of living balanced with 18th century greenhouse gas emissions. That, frankly, is the challenge in front of all of us to make sure we can do that. And off of that, everything hangs. Recycling, reuse, everything. And just a final point on the previous question, not that I want to say too much. There is a regulatory issue around how much recycled content can go back into food-grade packaging. So it's not just a willingness to do it, it's actually a regulatory issue. I have to say, the European Food Standards Agency was woefully slow on giving approvals to companies to include recycled content back into closed-loop products. Now that the Food Standards Agency in the UK is taking that on board, I think we have a big opportunity here to really pick up the pace on being able to meet those companies' desires on putting food-grade recycled content back into those items.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I'm going to come to you in a minute, Joe, but first of all, Philip, I'd like to ask how you see it from the glass industry's perspective.
Yeah, so I think reuse, and obviously I would say this, but glass is obviously perfect for reusable applications. We all can see examples of where reuse is already there for glass, milk bottles. There's also more modern examples of Loop, for example, which sees products from the big brands we know and love in reusable applications like glass, and then it's collected and then washed and refilled. So those kind of applications are there. I think the UK is behind other countries when it comes to reuse. Glass is used for reusable applications in South America, more widespread in Europe with water and beer, for example. And it's something that we certainly support. It's something that we're happy, my members are more than happy to produce reusable bottles. But I think it's just got to be done right. I think there are some considerations around the carbon footprint of transporting empty bottles around the country to be refilled. and also the water usage that's required to wash those bottles again before they are refilled. And when you think about single-use packaging, if you're increasing the recycled content over the years ahead, as we decarbonise as an economy with transport decarbonising, I think there is an argument there as well that actually single-use is not always the worst option. Single-use can be better than reuse, but there certainly is an application for reusable packaging. I think it should be done on a local level, so you're avoiding that long transport and the carbon footprint of that transport. And yeah, you know, a challenge retailers and producers to work with the glass industry to develop the circular economy for glass.
Mm-hmm. Joe?
Which one?
You.
So, what Philip just did was explain why this is tricky. Because actually, when you don't want to be doing one thing at the expense of another. But actually, if we start to look at things as a whole, because I think it was Michael who mentioned that 50% of glass is used outside of the food element of glass within bathrooms and all the rest of it. But it was Paul.
Yeah.
Right. But yesterday I saw some really interesting polymers from kelp, for example. So you know, yeah. So actually covering shampoos. Yeah, so that you take that element out, you could store in your glass container, but you refill something that just actually biodegrades. Now, if you like, we're going to see lots and lots of initiatives as we go through the next 5 to 10 years, because EPR, DRS, the way you work together will demand that. Now, the thoughts are that EPR will generate somewhere to the tune of 630 million that we can then plough back into driving that consistency and aiding local authorities. But Philip said something interesting earlier. The Wales is already at 90% by good connected systems and good consumer behaviour. So actually, that shows it can be done. Mm-hmm. So I would like to see us using more of the reuse, more of the understanding about our impact. We now see people renting clothes, fast fashion. You have a whole plethora of things, different recyclings, looking at the different challenges we have along the chain is important to get to the right point. Now, on food, now for me, the biggest heartache is that we have £3.2 billion worth of food that is thrown away in the first place. So again, that sort of takes us back to education, and maybe there are opportunities for packaging and extending life there. I also hold the gene editing and innovation brief. It is an exciting brief. There are things we can do, but it's about balance. It's about finding the right solution for the right problem and not thinking that the solution you have will fit the problem you have.
Yeah, good point about, the example you give is renting clothes, but I think the younger generation, their consumer behaviour is quite different to older generations, and that's something that's...
It is, but don't be fooled, they necessarily recycle as well as the older generation. There is something, there is, I don't know what Paul's survey handles out. There is a great desire, but it has to be simple, and...
They make a lot of noise about recycling.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah, of course.
So two really important things. First, to come back to the comment, I think it was by Kay. It's really important that whatever we're imagining for fates is integrated into the same system. So we're imagining a bin that's outside your house, and one of the big reasons that young people recycle worse is because the infrastructure in a block of flats is much worse for them to be able to do it. So there are other reasons why home ownership leads to better recycling. But that integration of that decision-making process means we need to have a much more nuanced waste management infrastructure where we can pull materials out to segregate them for reuse, likely tagged appropriately with something like an RFID chip. That then segregates those materials that can be given back to glass or aluminium or plastic to be able to transform them into something that is a reuse system. We can't have we're going to have this distributed network. But there's also a real understanding in terms of consequence, because you just brought up a kelp package. And if we're really concerned about whether or not a recyclable package is recycled, we should be really concerned of whether or not a biodegradable or a compostable package is biodegraded or composted. Because the standards that exist on those things right now are not fit for purpose. They've been done in a lab, they have not been done in a greater Manchester back garden, which, as we can see if we look outside, is bleak conditions for home composting.
Joe, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, please. Yeah, and I totally agree with what Paul was just saying about smarter living. I think all of us, we should keep these 21st century lifestyles, but we should make them smarter. I think that's the way we go forward with this, and I think recycling is one of the best ways we can actually do that. And I think, going back to the original question that Kay asked, I think one of the things that's really important is I think we need to be more transparent about the actual waste process so that residents actually understand what's going to happen to that waste, how is it going to be recycled, so that they are then encouraged to actually recycle more, because then they'll understand, the importance and the impact of them actually taking those actions in the first place. So at Staffordshire Moorlands District Council, what we've been trying to do is we've been trying to kind of tell that story, really, that narrative through our social media channels. We've been trying to tell that story of how, during the pandemic, all our waste crew have obviously been going out and, keeping those services going. And obviously we talked about the processes, of how we've achieved that, and the fact that, at the moment, we don't send any of our waste to landfill at all. And I think we really pride ourselves on that, because every council, that should be in that position where they're not sending any waste to landfill. And I think it's really important that the public understand and can actually see that that's making a difference. And what we're going to be doing is we are going to be launching quite a few campaigns, as a council in the coming few years once the waste strategy is implemented, so that we can obviously put that message out there on a local basis, so we can keep all this going, really. So I think communications are absolutely vital.
You're absolutely right, and it's really interesting that what you said about messaging, because I think, I said this before, but I think people know they have to recycle, but they're not quite sure why, and they're not quite sure what happens.
It's about trust, isn't it? It's about embedding that trust in the system.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so we've got a question here, and then we're going to go to one there. So this gentleman first.
Thank you. My name is Jonathan Branson. I work for Pernod Ricard. We're in the drinks business. We make some of the world's most famous spirits brands in the UK, Beefeater Gin. We make Chivas in Scotland. And that brings me to my question, which is around consistency across the UK. Because there's talk of a DRS scheme. I think there will be a DRS scheme in Scotland. What are the political mechanisms that we have to encourage a single and forge a single system in the UK? And there's a positive side to this, because we've had the example of how Wales can be an example to us in the way what it's doing already. And what can we learn from other systems which may be slightly different from the UK, and they're truly federal, but they also have had to tackle this problem of different approaches, because in business, we want a single UK market with, as far as possible, a harmonised approach. Thank you.
Really great question. Joe, do you want to?
I mean, you're right. Scotland has already announced details of its DRS scheme. It's all in. I think somebody is more heavily involved in the room than I am, so they may shout out. It's all in, including glass and plastics. There's considerable concern from manufacturers already that I'm hearing that the UK could deviate significantly. That will lead to enormous cost differentials, and that different labelling between Scotland and the rest of the UK, leading to retooling, stock control issues, etc., etc. Those are an expense at a different part of the business. It's probably although, you know, we are still discussing it, but it's unlikely that we will have the exact same plan. But I believe that the current plan should be close enough to avoid significant extra costs, because we have to make this work. Interesting point you've just posed about those other areas that operate a more federalised system. I've only knowledge as a consumer rather than from a broader point. It's something I'll take away with me. Thank you.
Michael, you must have experience of what they do in other places.
Oh, the guy with the foreign accent. Let's ask him. So I mean,
We'll
yeah.
have
So
that
I grew up in Canada with deposit return schemes on bottles. That did lead to a transition from glass for carbonated beverages into plastics. That decreased the carbon footprint of the beverage industry, so it was a good thing. But of course, Canada is massive. Like, I'm closer to home now than when I was in Vancouver on the West Coast. So we're a big country, big distances, and so the impact of distance and taking those glass bottles around is significant. But it all comes down to the specificity of what you're doing, right? And I think the alignment is really important, but we have to recognize that we just talked about the UK developing a system which every other place in the world will want to adopt. Well, if you create the best system, then the rest of the Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland the rest of Europe, the rest of the world will come into an alignment there. And so I think we need to focus on getting the system right and make sure that it avoids unintended consequences. The Scottish system will have significant unintended consequences. We have to avoid that and then show that the system that we've designed is best and export that.
Okay, thank you. Philip, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thank you. On Scotland, obviously, we were disappointed by the outcome of that scheme. And as has just been said around unintended consequences, when it comes to glass recycling, some local authorities in Scotland are already stopping the collection of glass at the doorstep and moving to things like bottle banks, which for us is a massive concern, because bottle banks, yes, they can be successful, but they definitely never achieve the same amount of recycling in the UK as at the doorstep. And so, for example, Dumfries and Galloway in Scotland, we've seen that, and that's before the scheme's actually gone live, and they've pointed to DRS as the reason for that. As I say, so that's a concern. I think what I'd also say is, it was mentioned right at the beginning about how England is 85% of the market, and so surely as an industry, as an economy, we need to get it right for England, and then everywhere else, you know, should probably follow. Because what we're going to see, Scotland are going ahead probably 18 months, 2 years ahead of the rest of the UK. There's also a chance there to learn, to see what happens in terms of recycling rates, unintended consequences, implications for local authorities. And I know a lot of industry, not just glass, felt that Scotland have taken the wrong approach here. So let's get it right. Let's not just follow Scotland's lead for the sake of it.
And Paul, you had a point.
Thank you very much. It was Jonathan, wasn't it? I certainly picked up the word gin. That came out loud and clear. Thank you, thank you, Jonathan, for the question. Well, look, the well-designed system should be the thing on the pedestal, but we live in a democracy, and we have devolution, and with that comes different decisions that may well happen. We've seen that with COVID-19. Nothing has been more important to the United Kingdom and the world than dealing with COVID-19 over the last 2 years, and yet each of the nations has decided to plough their own course on that, and that's what democracy brings. So I have to say, from industry's point of view, there are things that we would like to see, but there are things that we're also realistic may well have to happen, which mean that the well-designed system that we want may not be quite as we set out. And the Minister has said, you know, unlikely to have exactly the same plan, but we don't want to move backwards in any of the nations. We want to move forward. So I would say this. When I used to work in council services, and when I was configuring council services and taking reports to my beloved council member in charge of those services. What I wanted to know was, how do I in one go put in place the configuration of the recycling service for all the residual waste, the recycling, the different materials, what's in, what's out, what about the food waste, what about the organics, how do I relate to the disposal authority? The worst thing to do was to try and do that on a piecemeal basis. Well, this week we'll include this. Next month we'll include that item. The month after we'll take that out. Oh, the week after that we're going to do something different. That is the worst. So I go back to what I said at the beginning. This is a single set of packaging reforms. In our mind, DRS and EPR and consistency must happen at the same time. And if they don't, no council in the country will be able to know whether they're coming or going on what to include in their services. And as producers are going to be paying for those in future, we want to be assured, obviously, that they're going to deliver value for money. So all I would say, going back to what Phil has repeated, what I said earlier, England, what happens in England matters a lot. It's 85% of the population, vast majority of those 4.6 million businesses that we're asking to recycle even more. If we can work with the Minister on timing, policies and the supply chain cohesion, I think we could get there. If you ask me, if you put me on the spot to ask a time, I would say 2024 is much more within sights than 2023 or 2022 for a whole load of practical reasons. But I wouldn't really want to be pushing it into 25, 26. I think we've got to get this together now in the next 2 years and have a coherent single plan to hit a single year, get it done.
Yeah, and Joe, I think you can answer some of that from a council perspective.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. So when it comes to the consistency of services, obviously we discussed how important that is. Obviously, we said about, you know, the simplicity of it, having that labelling that consumers understand. Obviously, we've said about the communication and the fact that, you know, if you've got weekly collections, that helps residents. But there are some challenges. There are some huge challenges with all of this. I mean, it's our district council at Staffordshire Moorlands. We actually have, because we're a very rural area, we have 600 properties at the moment that do not receive collection for glass, food or garden waste. So there needs to be a review of the van round. So obviously, because we have vans that obviously small vans that have to go and collect from those properties, and so we need to make sure that there's a consistency there across the country to make sure that obviously those properties receive the right collection, you know, so we can increase recycling rates. That's obviously really, really important. And I have discussed this, you know, with our council offices quite a lot, you know, the deposit return scheme, and obviously, yeah, there's going to be that reduction in, you know, target items being put into our dry mix recycling, and it does produce a challenge because it does reduce the amount of income that we make, you know, from our recycling credits. So that does present a bit of a challenge because obviously we use that to offset the cost of our waste collection. So that's something that's obviously going to be a challenge for us. There's also a number of other things. So obviously, the reduction of dry mix recycling tonnage may also affect the viability of long-term contracts with reprocessors, as the reduction in the tonnage would make it harder to forecast the tonnages over the course of the contract. So that's obviously another challenge that obviously we've got to consider within the mix. So obviously there are lots of positives of this, you know, for consumers. You know, it's something that is really important, but obviously there's quite a few challenges for local authorities. So it's really important. Obviously, we keep that dialogue open between local and national government to make sure, you know, we can make this work as well as we possibly can.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right, there's a question here, and how many more we've got so far? I'm going to take two at a time. So I'm going to take this one and the gentleman here on the end. If you can make them snappy, so we're running out of time.
My name's Anthony McGurk. I'm a constituent from Oxfordshire. I'm also behind the world's first digital DRS trial.
Oh, right.
And I'll top trump the percentage rate in a minute. My question for the Minister is, you spoke about innovation, yet the current thinking in DEFRA is that we should be installing a DRS system that was pioneered back in the 1980s. And I'm just interested to know when will DEFRA's thinking start to change
Okay.
and go digital? And my top trump is we ran a trial in Dublin, Ireland, which finished 2 weeks ago, where we got 96% return rate on people who paid a deposit.
Huh.
And that's from home recycling, so it does work.
Yeah, that's a great addition. Can we just take this one here as well, and then?
Thank you, Lewis from British Soft Drinks Association. Picking up on a wider coherence point, we've heard about academia and innovation, we've heard about the Treasury, we've heard about local government. Wonder if panellists could give me views on how they see government working together between departments, Treasury and DEFRA working a bit closer on this, and working more broadly, whether they think that's going well or what might be improved.
Okay, thank you. So if the panellists could take both of those questions at the same time. Jo, do you want to start?
So fascinating that you got those levels on the scheme. I'm 2 weeks in, okay? As somebody, I think it was Paul, they paid tribute to the work of Michael Gove, of Therese Coffey, of George Eustace, and of Rebecca Powell, who have moved mountains of waste. Who have moved mountains in actually making sure these policies are not seen as something we shouldn't be tackling. As I say, I have the innovation brief, and I'd be delighted to have a conversation with you afterwards. But we are still, we looked in the consultation for views on scope, scheme governance, targets, return points, and the timelines. Innovation is a wonderful thing. Actually, if you can prove it works and you can make it pay, usually there's a market for it, but not always. Let's have a conversation. But you said about it's from the 1980s. Actually, I'm so old, I remember taking Corona pop bottles to the corner shop. Yeah. So actually, if that's not a deposit return scheme, I don't know what is. I think what we're talking about is using that innovation, using tracking, using all these other enablers that we have, using apps, using digital formats to make sure we get this right. So, and on your coherency across government, not much happens in government without the Treasury, is what I would say on the first point. And we are talking the whole time to make sure that there is that consistency, coherency, as Joe's outlined. Actually, this is challenging. It's challenging from an income stream point of view, but actually it's challenging from understanding how you're going to actually maneuver yourself into a position where you have diminishing amounts, at the same time you're asking for a greater return because you want to do more. So they are cross-government, I would say, more than Treasury, which is vital. It's actually what was until a week or so ago MHCLG, but is now a section of letters with UP or LP in it. Or, no, can't even remember. There's a selection of letters for homes and communities, including levelling up. And if we should level up anything, it's our ability to recycle.
Mm-hmm. Philip, did you want to come in on those?
Yeah, I think on digital, just to say, British Glass is a member of the industry working group on digital DRS. Obviously not advocating for a deposit. We don't think a deposit's needed for glass, but we do recognise the potential technology and the opportunities around that technology. Data is everywhere, and it could be used to improve recycling rates, understanding what's recycled, what's not recycled, who's recycling, who's not recycling, and also a great way to engage with the public, inform and educate the public. And what you were saying, Tony, about about the old-fashioned technology, I agree. We're looking at rolling out something like 44,000 RVMs, costing over £1 billion. Imagine rolling out that many cash points now, when everyone's using their smartphones and using online banking. It just doesn't make sense. So let's really focus on what technology could do to benefit recycling, whether it's a deposit scheme or not. Technology and digital is going to happen when it comes to recycling, like it is everywhere, every part of society. So let's really prioritise that. And also, I think from a glass perspective, a digital approach would mean keeping glass at our doorsteps, which obviously we support. It means we use existing infrastructure, so you're reducing costs. And I think also, what I just wanted to highlight here is Wrap Cymru. So the charity Wrap Cymru recently did some research into digital, because the Welsh Government are very keen on this. They're looking at this in a lot of detail. And they found that glass collected at the doorstep is a higher quality for closed-loop recycling compared to glass that's collected through reverse vending machines. So again, anything that keeps glass at the curbside, increases recycling rates, you know, something we can definitely get behind.
Yeah. Michael?
Yes, I think on both of those, they're really interesting and important issues to get right. So the idea of a digital DRS, again, I'm not really a fan of DRS, but I think if you integrate that DRS into using that same digital infrastructure to make other decisions, that becomes really important. But the key is to make sure that that data stays open and there's not a profiteering on how that data is managed, right? Because that then allows the government to make really good decisions because they actually know where their waste is going. They don't have that right now. And what's really important there is that's actually really well linked to the question around how government works together. I mean, we have a program right now that includes HMRC, DEFRA, and local councils that look at systemic change in waste management. But it's essential that it is not isolated in government. In that same group are people across the plastic supply chain, from brand owners all the way through to reprocessors, and that creates these links where people who don't traditionally talk to each other because they feel isolated in silos are able to co-develop solutions, right? And so instead of it being top down, it becomes bottom up, and that makes a much more robust plan for the future.
Joe?
Yeah, I'm all for working across government. I mean, when it comes to issues like the environment, you should always take a partnership approach. You cannot tackle this alone as a single organisation. I've always had that view ever since I joined the district council 2 years ago. It's the one thing that I've learnt more than anything else, that you have to work in partnership when you're tackling these really complex issues, whatever issue it might be. I was also just going to add, obviously, this is an original idea from the 80s, but I think it's, I think it's a really good idea. I think we need to, obviously bring in that new technology with it. And I think as well, just going back to some of the communications and technology points I was making before, one thing that we're doing at Staffordshire Moorlands District Council is we are introducing a brand new in-cab system which will provide live collection updates to our customer services team, and it will make our online services far more interactive and user-friendly for our residents. Obviously, we have like an update system already on our website, but we want to make it even more interactive, and it will just mean that our residents get more regular updates on the recycling and everything and what's happening with that. And one thing we're also looking at doing is we're looking at introducing a brand new app. So a colleague of mine that I'm working with has got an app called the Utter Rubbish app, and it's about improving recycling rates. So we're looking at becoming one of the first councils in the country to roll out this app with our local residents, because it just then means they can go on the app, they can find out like which things go in which bin, they can find out the opening times for the recycling centres, and they can just find top tips of ways in which they can recycle better. So things like that, and it's all about smarter living and trying to get that message out there really as much as possible, because I think we've got to do that as much as we possibly can to bring about that really important behavioural change that we do need with this.
Back to messaging, which you guys are obviously really good at by the sounds of it. Paul,
Thank you. So on the two questions, it's a forever problem, isn't it, getting organisations to work together. I don't know any very large business that has the same problem, not between government departments, but between their marketing and sustainability department. It's the same issue. We've got to keep pressing on that. And what I'm absolutely clear about is that more dialogue is better than none. But there has been some divergence between Treasury and other parts of government on the timings of when they're going to be doing things like plastic packaging tax and the packaging of system reforms, packaging reforms that Joe is in charge of. So it'd be great to bring those back into Cllr again. On the digital DRS, as a fairly influential organisation, Inkpen is lobbied all of the time by all sorts of views that people have to say I'm agnostic on whether it should be digital or not, because I want to see the evidence. And I'm glad, therefore, that you're doing the trials. What I'm clear about, as a customer myself, is I can use an app at home. I'm absolutely confident you will prove to me that citizens can use an app at home and put recycling of their bottles in the existing bin that they've got. I have no doubt at all that you will prove that. What I want to set the benchmark for you to take away is this, which is that the responsibilities that the DRS management organisation will have and the accountabilities they'll have to the governments around capture, quality, use of those materials, that a digital DRS will be able to meet exactly the same results as a return to retail model. And the return to retail model, 1980s or not, I don't care. We would fashion a return to retailer model in this country as befits the 21st century. So I want to see the results. That's what I'm going to say.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to sneak two more in. There was one, yes, and here.
Thank you, Lydia from the Association of Convenience Stores, representing 33,500 retail outlets across the UK. I'm working very closely with people in the room, so it's great to see people for the first time in person rather than over Zoom. But I'm really interested, we're involved in, as a member of Circularity Scotland, the scheme administrator in Scotland, and obviously right now we're learning those lessons already before the scheme has gone live. I'd like to sort of understand how those lessons are being listened to already within government through partnership between the Scottish Government and sort of Westminster as well, because I think that's really important that we don't leave the lessons to when the scheme's gone live, because this process is happening now and very rapidly. So I'd really like to sort of understand those conversations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then we'll take the final question here and we'll do them together.
Thanks. I'm Aaron from Coca-Cola. I'd like to just endorse what Jonathan and Lydia have said about this sort of consistency between England and Scotland. Also, the Minister mentioned we're in a race, and how does that marry up to the conceptual technologies we've heard about today, which will need evidence and proving? For example, digital DRS requires an individual ledger on each packaging unit. We produce 2,000 cans per minute. Is that possible? We haven't seen the evidence that it is. And just endorse the government's agenda on this. We support a DRS, notwithstanding the challenges, but we use a lot of recycled plastic. In fact, we're the biggest user of recycled plastic in the country. A lot of that comes from overseas, unfortunately, because there isn't the infrastructure in the UK as it stands. So a DRS will alleviate that.
Okay, thank you. Right, 45 seconds each, starting with you, Joe.
So on the DRS, the initial government response confirmed the timeline for introduction from 2024. The publication is expected shortly. Following that full response, there will obviously be a little more clarity, making sure that new regulations to implement EPR using enabling powers by the Environment Bill at the end of 2023, making sure we've got that scheme administrator in place to mobilise ahead of the start of the scheme. I've taken on board your point, Paul, about this consistency in times, but you've got, we are in, I am picking up and 2 weeks in, we've got those live consultations, we've got those reports all coming out. I am hearing from you the need to keep informed. So let's keep the dialogue going. Everything is evidence-based. You know, research doesn't always give us the answers. It sometimes gives us more questions to ask ourselves, which is part of the problem, and we do have to make decisions here. But actually enabling that consistency through the system, permanently challenging ourselves, taking glass out of glass. Green King, for example, have taken something like 30% out of their bottles. It actually improves the cost of moving those bottles around. You haven't got so much drain down on the, pull down on the road as far as moving your bottles around, etc., etc. And we constantly talk to the devolved authorities. As Paul highlighted, you know, we are members of a family. We don't always agree, but at the end of the day, it's best when we try and get on and deliver things that actually work across the union for the benefit of the union. And technology will take us places, and it is going to be something that we need to work with industry on, Aaron. You know, government can't, we're not there as far as driving your business objectives, but making sure we get this right, making sure that we have traceability, making sure that the consumer has confidence. All those things are important as we drive this agenda forward.
Michael, did you want to add anything?
I guess I would come back to, and again, I would say I'm a bit agnostic in terms of the method that we're choosing, or at least tagging agnostic. I think there does need to be some sort of route for us to get more information about the materials we choose. But we also have to think about the footprint of that infrastructure that we're creating. So if we're going to go and put some sort of receptacle, complex or otherwise, across the United Kingdom, what is the carbon footprint of building all of those things and the improvement on our recycling infrastructure? How many years do we need to actually run that before we get a return on investment? And this is about waste, but it interacts directly with all of our global carbon targets. We can't lose sight of those overarching goals because we want to recycle more.
Right. Paul?
Thank you. Agree entirely with what the Minister has said, and Michael. In fact, one of the ever constant issues is that we tend to all agree with each other, but the system doesn't really show that.
Yeah.
It seems to me. So look, Lydia, you asked about the lessons. There's lessons to learn from the Circularity Scotland experience. There's lessons to learn from all sorts of experiences from across the entire sector, including how we feel about things now and why. Asking the question, why is change the thing that we want? It goes back to what you said earlier, Joe, which is what are we seeking to achieve? So I say, of course, you've got to have those lessons. The Minister's already identified that we've got to have the crossover of those lessons for how the EPR scheme administrator is appointed, what the remit is of the EPR scheme administrator, and how the two scheme administrators for EPR and DRS dovetail together. We've got to have them working together. What I would say as my final point here is the next 3 months, the next 6 months, I think, are really, really important to bed down on what it is we're going to do. And I know that the officials in the four governments and ministers across all four governments are looking at all of that right now. If there are conversations that need to be had in the next 3 months, we are more than willing to join you with that, as we already are on eco-modulation, litter and business payments. That's Scotland calling now. And we have, I have to say, very, very few, if any, red lines. Because that's how it should be when you're transforming a system for something better than we've got. So I just put that on the table, and we're more than happy to come in and see you and have conversations, and with others around the table. Let's do it together.
Okay, Joe Porter.
Thank you. I would say let's keep that partnership approach to this issue going, because I think if we're going to keep increasing recycling rates, we're going to do our bit, you know, to protect our planet and leave our environment in a better state than we inherited with, you know, things like recycling and waste collection services. We need to be working together on this. We can't work in isolation. You know, as Joe says, we're all part of a family here. We've all got to work together. We've all got different, you know, bits of expertise in the room. We've all got to work with each other on this, and, you know, more importantly, we've got to make sure that the public have trust in the system that we're implementing on the ground. And I would just say, you know, we as councils, particularly my council, we want to do our bit. We want to be ambitious with recycling. We want to do as much as we possibly can on the ground of this. So let's keep going with this.
Okay, thank you. Philip?
Yeah, I think all I'd say in terms of a glass perspective is, you know, we want to see high rates of collection, recycling rates, and we believe, we know that this can be achieved more effectively, more quickly and more cost effectively if we look to build on our existing system. Let's build EPR and consistency into our existing system. You know, we just simply don't believe the risks of introducing a new, an unknown deposit return scheme system is the right thing for glass.
So I'll leave it there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Okay, so I'd like to wrap up by asking the panel, what is the one key thing that the government needs to do to make a success of our UK recycling solutions going forward, in one sentence? And in Joe's case, what is the one key priority? I am going to start with Michael.
I think it's a focus on past tense terminology. It does not matter if something is recyclable or biodegradable or compostable if it is not recycled, composted or biodegraded.
Okay, Joe Porter.
I would say keep it simple, ensure people can understand it, and make sure it's as accessible as possible to local residents.
Mm-hmm. Philip.
Well, I think you might guess mine. Let's keep glass outside of the DRS.
Paul.
Thank you. So this brand new wonderful system that we're going to design, it has to be financially sustainable for every part of the system. If one part falls over, the whole system falls over. And we've got to have more and more airtime on the environmental outcomes of all of this, not just transactional issues between one sector and another.
Okay, and Joe, what's the one key priority?
So I am not going to be drawn to that one key priority. Of
course you're not.
No, given that we've got DRS, APR, we have got new technologies, we've got people sitting on the cusp of doing things, we've got lots of dates and lots of floating things. What I will say is the next 6 months, I agree with Paul, are the important ones. So my one sentence is, let's work together to make it simple, transparent, doable, deliverable, so we recycle or reuse more, we take innovation at our heart, and we actually make sure, I think it was Michael that said, that we are global leaders in this by not shutting our eyes to the opportunity, because we've already made the decisions in our own minds at the moment.
Excellent. There's a very positive note to end on. So thank you very much to British Glass for sponsoring this panel today. Thank you to all of the panellists, and thank you to the audience, both in the room and online. I hope the tech problems weren't too bad. The panel will be available on our YouTube channel if anybody did have issues in listening to it. So it remains me to say that you can join Bright Blue for the bargain price of £10 for conference only. I think it's only normally £20, but please do join, and you will get invites to all sorts of different and interesting things. We've got many more. We've got 27 events running in total at conference. There's a few more today, so please do check our programme and go along. And so let's have a round of applause for our panellists today.